Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be having Mr. Manwani join with us in some time from now, but we move on to the next keynote address for the day. So please help me in welcoming Mr. Vikas Malhotra, Country Manager, Lastpass India. Over to you, sir.
Hello, everyone. My name is Vikas Malhotra, and I'm the country manager at Lastpass. Thanks a lot for tuning in. Over the next 15 to 20 minutes, I'll be sharing some insights with you about some of the data breaches that are happening around the world, what are the reasons behind that, and how businesses can actually strengthen their security posture by actually fixing in their first line of defense, that's user credentials. So with this, let's jump right in and let's look at some of the famous breaches that happened over the past 1 year that has caught the attention of all the security leaders. I'm sure you're familiar with all these breaches, which is about T-Mobile, SolarWinds, Colonial Pipeline, MailChimp. One of the things that I'd like to point out towards this is that look at the highlighted part over here. The common reason that emerges out of these breaches is compromised credentials. So each one of these technologically advanced organizations, which do spend a lot of consulting dollars, a lot of money on their infrastructure, got breached because of compromised credentials. And I'll be talking more about that in my follow-up slides. So with this, let's look at some data points around the data breaches over the last 1 year. Now, this is a report that has been compiled by Verizon. That's the report I'm referring to. So Verizon analyzed close to about 79,000, close to about 80,000 incidents across the world, right? Which included India as well. And out of that, there were some 5,000, little over 5,000 confirmed breaches. So with this, what Verizon came out was that 85% of the breaches actually involved a human element, which encompasses any sort of attack, right? It could be a social action such as phishing or stolen credentials or human errors. Now, within that 85% bracket, 61% involved compromised credentials. Now, that's a big number, right? Wherein a hacker has actually compromised the credentials, that's a username and a password, and has intruded into your system. Social engineering, something like phishing, right, has contributed to 35% of the breaches. The other two data points are that external breaches are 80%, and 96% of the breaches within Asia Pacific were financially motivated. That means all 96% of the breaches were actually a ransomware attack. So while this is the data point on some of the breaches, let's try to understand the reason behind this, right? So before I jump into that, I'd like to show a common scenario, a common mistake that we do. So I'm referring to this character, famous character from the series Office. It's on Prime Video. And so this character's name is Steve Carell. Not that he has done it really, but this is a meme that I kind of downloaded from the internet. And the reason I did that was to show that what's the most common and fundamental mistake that we make while we are thinking that we have done a smart thing, right? So what we do is we have a password, which is very common, easy to remember, probably has some of our personal details or all of our personal details. So while that's one mistake, the bigger mistake is we carry that password across all our digital footprint and further to our organizations, putting our organization at risk. So this is something that we need to look at ourselves, reflect on ourselves as an individual, but at the same time, as a security leader, this is something that you need to think about, that are you aware of what kind of credential behavior your employees are bringing in, right? So every year we at Lastpass publish a report called the Psychology of Passwords. And in the subsequent slides, I'll share some data points from that report. In fact, it's a very interesting report, irrespective of what your role is within your organization, or maybe you're an individual. I would strongly recommend you to visit lastpass.com, go to the resources section and download this report. This report will basically help us understand of why we do certain things and what part of that behavior should be avoided clearly. So as a part of this report, what we did was we surveyed close to about 5,000 plus individuals, employers across the world. And this is what people say. So when we asked them that, do you agree that if a password is compromised, that's a concern? 79% said yes, but still 51% rely on their memory to track a password. So when we say that 51% rely on their memory, that actually means that we tend to keep very simple and easy to remember passwords. The additional data point is that 92% of the respondents actually agreed that using the same password or a variation of the same password is a risk, right? But 65% always or mostly will continue using the same password. So 92% agreed, yes, that there's a risk. And 65% we still continue to do that. So that's on the individual side, some data points. Let's look at something between the employee and the employer. 47% of the employees did not change their password since working remotely. So we analyzed the data from 2020, since the time the pandemic set in, around February, March, depending on which part of the world it came in first. And since then, till up to June 21 is when this report was published, we had these data points, wherein 47% individuals did not change their online security habits. And this is a very big risk, right? And we saw a huge spike in the cyber crime during that period. On the other hand, only 39% of the employers could actually get their employees to log in from safe networks, right? Obviously, because the physical boundaries were no longer there and a lot had changed, right? People were working from home or from any other location. The security leaders were grappling with the fact that how do we maintain security along with business continuity? 46% of the employees, they actually did not strengthen their password while working remotely. So possibly a person like me could actually put in a password like a Vikas Malhotra @123. So I have adhered to my password policy, possibly. It has to be these many characters, uppercase, lowercase, special character. But at the same time, I used my personal details into that password. 35% of the employers say that they could get only 35% made employees update their password more regularly. So only 35% could get their employees to update passwords regularly. And last data point, this is very crucial, the way we share passwords within our colleagues in our organization. 44% shared sensitive information and passwords for professional accounts while working remotely. And 35%, only 35% of the employers could actually enhance their authentication methods. So with this so what we are seeing is, with the number of breaches and with this kind of a behavior, there is certainly a gap that is existing. And I'll keep it very simple, right? No matter which report I could refer to, whether it's Verizon, IBM, FireEye, or Mandiant, in their cybersecurity reports, trends, one thing they have attributed cyber breaches to is weak, reused, or stolen credentials. So that cannot be taken away. And the problem, what I see is that the security leaders have put in solutions like PIM, PAM, SSO, MFA, 2FA to bridge this gap. However, the gap continues to remain. If you were to recall the organizations that I showed that were breached, I'm sure that you will agree that they did have such systems in place. But we all know that it's not technically or commercially viable to bring in every application in our environment under the SSO, right? So if it's not under SSO, it's still exposed, right? It's still exposed, and more the number of users of that application, actually, it's not that just that application which is vulnerable, it's that many users that are creating those vulnerabilities. So the question that I always ask whenever I'm interacting with a security leader is that, can you tell me if an employee on your network is using a password from their personal life like Netflix, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, etc. as your corporate login? Well, the answer is clearly no, or they don't know about it, right? So this means that there is a gap, and this gap needs to be bridged. To further help you understand, I use another picture over here, wherein on one side, on the left-hand corner, what we have is, we have seen over the past, organizations are investing money into building their defenses high and wide, investing hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars into technologies like next-gen firewalls, threat intelligence services, third-party cybersecurity consultancy, and whatnot to better equip themselves and defend and respond to a cyber attack. And on the other hand, the reality is that more often than not, our organization cybersecurity is up to the behaviors and hygiene of people we employ. So in this case, I'm naming this employee as Dave. This Dave could be anybody in the organization, irrespective of the size, the location of the organization, and irrespective of the hierarchy within the organization. So anybody could be this Dave who is putting in his personal details like birth date, pet's name, and putting the organization at risk. So with best of technologies and processes and employee behavior, employee password hygiene on one side, what happens is this remains fundamentally broken. The threat landscape continues to be exposed. The threat landscape continues to grow if more and more employees bring in this kind of behavior. Moving on, let's look at some of the data points. So here I'm representing some numbers from Mandiant, who are a global leader actually in incident response. So if you could think of any major cybersecurity incident that has happened anywhere in the world or that has made headlines, it's more likely that they have been the responders to forensically investigate the breach. So they develop an annual report where they have collated all of their frontline incident responses from the previous year, sharing many first-hand insights from their technical investigations, including the nature of the attacks as well as highlight the tools, tactics, and procedures that they have investigated. So what they come up with is something called the dwell time. Now, the dwell time is the time that a hacker actually spends into the infrastructure without actually getting detected, right? Look at these numbers starting from 2017. And this is APAC numbers only, by the way. So over the last 4-5 years, look at the staggering numbers. We had a dwell time of close to about 1,000+ days. Yes, this number is certainly coming down, but one of the main reasons for this number is coming down is businesses embracing password managers, businesses strengthening their first line of defense, because let's not forget, in many advanced countries like Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Singapore, the data protection laws are very stringent, and there are huge penalties associated with data breaches, and especially non-reporting of data breaches. So with that said, it's extremely important for businesses to strengthen their first line of defense. And I'm sure if we were to slice and dice some of this data, we will see that unfortunately, in India, this number would be really, really high, right? So with this said, it's extremely important that we understand the fact that no breach does not mean no intrusion. What it could mean is that there is an intrusion, but the hacker is observing and trying to arrive at their next move, which could be a DDoS attack or a ransomware attack, or what exactly they intend to do. So what we are trying to communicate here is that strengthen that line of defense and prevent intrusion first. That's the key point over here. Moving forward over here, what I'd like to hear is the security landscape, how the security landscape is changing within the businesses, given all these threats, the rampant threats, and these are not going to subside. So just beyond technology, looking at technology and monitoring incidents, the security landscape for a security leader has increased. So we'll start with compliance. The first and foremost is compliance. A lot of investments that are going in technologies and processes and people is from a compliance perspective, because the governments are taking notice of these cyber crimes, of these breaches, and getting businesses to invest a lot to be compliant. The second part is the password management is now emerging as a top of the agenda as a result of the security audit. So you have a security audit in these advanced countries, whether it's US or European Union or Australia or New Zealand. The first recommendation is getting in a password manager, and then any other technology. Because the data, as I said, has proved that the larger number of breaches are because of compromised credentials. The threat landscape on executives are certainly increasing, right? The rise in phishing attacks, there's a 350% increase globally since COVID, that the phishing attacks have gone up. And I'm sure we have all seen that in our organizations. The fifth point is a moving away from focusing on security technology to people and processes. Now it's more about aligning technologies with people, with the processes. It's no more in a world where businesses can just bring in, IT security leaders can bring in a technology without actually having people and processes at its center. And last but not the least, dedicated security awareness programs. Look at the number of security drills that a security leader like yourself has in their organizations, just to create that awareness and that employee education to prevent such breaches. So with this, I'll move on to share that why businesses around the world have invested in Lastpass. So I'll not go through all of this detail here because there's more conversation that we need to have as we move forward, but I'll just certainly highlight some key points. So first is improving password controls. So a password manager as the first line of defense, wherein we say that you put all the applications behind a vault and access those applications using a password manager than actually accessing those directly. So let Lastpass remember the passwords for you. Let Lastpass generate the passwords for you, and the employees can focus on their work, right? Reducing the success rate of phishing attacks across all businesses. So phishing attacks are rampant. These will continue to grow in the times to come. And this is something that IT security leaders have taken notice and invested in solutions like Lastpass. Reducing third-party risks. That's very important. Look at the business risk that we as an organization could pose to our customers, to our vendors, or to anyone, wherever we are doing business. Maybe a Dave, kind of an ignorant person, is posing that risk not only to their organization, but to the associated organizations also, where we are doing business with, right? And last but not the least, as I mentioned earlier, strengthening the regulatory compliance. Password management is becoming the first recommendation from a compliance perspective in any of the advanced countries where they have data protection laws. India, we are expecting our data protection bill to be passed very soon, and I'm sure the security leaders and the compliance leaders and risk officers will certainly take notice of this and will start embracing password managers as the first line of defense. So I hope I could provide you some insights. And with this, I conclude my presentation. I'm available on LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to connect with you as we move forward. Thank you so much for listening in.